That's right. Do it like that. Yeah.
So I it's Yolo 1, 2. I wouldn't have their and so yes, and then I had a baby. So I was like, so I didn't but I was not like, oh, by myself. Okay.
It's like, I mean, it's Jay.
Yeah. Yeah. Partly because I work at home.
Oh.
It's technically curiosity. Yeah. When I was there, settled or whatever, so that was, or at least, well, I mean, it had over to play it up. Yeah. Sure, that's true. Because that's the, I was a shelter for that. Yeah. Yeah. She was trying to follow exactly what you're about.
Yeah. Sake of money. I'm hardly a question. So I would have that. When I was trying to speak to the
That's always nice, yeah.
Oh, we're not doing that? Last week. That's like.
Yeah.
Started
Okay.
Direct connectors, this one, finding. Yeah.
I almost put my kids in fitness. I was like, oh, we're like.
This should pop. I guess that was.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Oh. I'm bringing that up. So we'll. You guys going there? We're going in there. I'll take care of water.
I did.
We've got water. Yeah,
Good enough.
tea and coffee.
Would you like your water hot?
I can provide hot water, even some ice too.
So glad I can bring the final. You've been asking me. Oh.
Not this time.
Nothing. Okay.
Okay.
Fish has been asking me to come.
Nice to meet you.
Okay. Yeah, there are. I don't Okay, all right, well, we'll see you in a little bit.
You can solve the comment.
Okay, so that.
Nothing's being done.
We don't have a name.
Did you really?
Yeah. They're gonna go.
Yeah.
Doing the bus stuff.
Here, let's see. Hey there. Hi. You can be on city service.
Yeah. He is. I got her.
I'm still waiting. For now. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, or it's maybe I can get there.
All day long.
Like, oh yeah. Right? Yeah, absolutely. That's good. Yeah, let's get up.
I know that it's running out. I know. I know. I'd wear it. I'd wear it. I love that. Yeah.
You were on crazy.
I'm not crazy. I can take it. I tried to straight. I tried to straight. Yeah. I guess. Oh, see?
Good touch.
Good time.
Oh, you were.
Good time. I'm sorry. I just took me a minute to hear.
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna bring the piano. It's the guy.
That's great.
He's like that.
I think.
Oh, no. Oh, okay. You know. Yeah. We're taking with all the. Well, I say the second part.
Yeah, that's different. That's what they ended it. Well, I mean, we ended. So we left. 12:50.
You said the whole thing. But it was really worthwhile. And part two.
Because it was a little bit smaller and we could kind of stay there.
Really good.
For pressure, like, I won't, I didn't want to speak during the first one. Only because there's so many. It took so long. And that's their day. They're 9 to 5. I wasn't there on the 7th. But I think some of them. You gotta read the audience. Like, you didn't know. Say nice things about.
I still wait before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, we're gonna read that stuff. I mean, it's just, it's. There's something.
I'm gonna try to update.
Yeah.
What is the difference?
Yeah, we have to, things out.
It's the black and stuff.
No, I got it.
Yeah, from Veterans Day.
Yeah, exactly.
I saw that.
Yeah.
Sorry, perfect.
I left.
Yeah, yeah, it's gonna be.
I had my iPad, my stuff.
Yeah, yeah, we show up. Yes, no.
Yeah. It's perfect.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final meeting of 2023 of the Yolo County Transportation District. Actually, we call ourselves Yolo Transportation District now, and it's now 6 o'clock. This is Monday, December 11th, 2023. We have a couple items on our agenda before we go to closed session. The first is recognizing that we have almost a complete board, expecting Dr. Dante Curley from West Sacramento shortly. Otherwise, everyone is present, and we now have to take a motion to approve the agenda for December 11th. Is there such a motion?
Move to approve the agenda for tonight.
Okay. A motion in the second to approve the agenda for this evening. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. We are now going to close session with conference on legal counsel regarding a significant exposure to litigation pursuant to government code 54956.9D2.
Mr. Chair, I think we were supposed to take public comment on items not on the agenda. On item 2.
But we did discuss that.
Sure, so it's up to you as to whether you want to take the public comments first, or if you want to open it up to public comment as to the closed session now, and
Is there any public comment relative to closed session? That's where I was going. Mr. Allen Hurst.
My only comment is, I assume you're gonna discuss the possible environmental litigation involving the environmental impact statement. April Autumn said at the forum on Thursday night that, quote, "I can't defend Caltrans calculations on induced demand." If our staff can't defend in public that, why are we hiring a lawyer to defend Caltrans calculations? That's probably gonna be one of the biggest contentions of this thing. Okay, Barb wrote a letter about another Caltrans DER and found that Caltrans understated induced demand by 15 times. I think the same thing is a problem here.
A little closer to the mic. Someone in the back is having.
Thank you. I'm just concerned that basically if the staff can't defend the EAR, why is Yolo Transportation District gonna hire a lawyer to defend Caltrans calculations? Thank you very much.
And thank you, Alan. All right, any additional public comment on our closed session? If there's not, we'll now expect to be gone maybe 20 minutes or so to have this conversation, but we don't know. But we'll be back soon, okay?
okay,
Get yourself.
so just to clarify, when we return is when we'll take public comment on the non-agenda consent items, correct?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
But it'll be more proximate to the distance we're doing.
So we need to get. I got the
Yeah, right.
Did your, first report saying, for all the- Yeah, they're nice. They're just. Well, you know, women's foot was, the torture device, she parts of the.
All right, we are back and we have no reportable action from our closed session this evening. We will return to our agenda and begin with public comment relative to the consent calendar. That's items 5A through 5G. Excuse me. We've already covered anything not related to the agenda, so now we're on the consent calendar. Let me start with my own colleagues. Colleagues, do you have any item you wish to take off of the consent calendar for independent discussion or modification? We do have one issue on our calendar. We're scheduled to have a meeting in November 11th of 2024. That is Veterans Day, a federal holiday. So we're going to cancel them the following week, November 18, as an alternative date. So with that correction, we are now considering the consent calendar. Any comments from the board? Seeing none, any member of the public wish to comment on the consent calendar? There being none, is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded to adopt the consent calendar with the date correction for the calendar. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And that takes us to our regular calendar, and item 7 is the YoloTD draft environmental document. And I believe who's going to introduce it, and Brian's going to weigh in.
Yes, I will just do a few opening remarks and then I'll hand it over to Brian, and also we're going to be hearing from Caltrans as well with this agenda item. So, Mr. Chair, we have reached a critical point in this project where we do have an EIR. And we will be talking about some of the feedback that we have received. We'll be hearing an overview of the EIR from Caltrans. We'll share some of the feedback that we have received to date from members of the public. And then we do have a staff recommendation in terms of expressing a preference for one of the alternatives that is identified in the EIR. And so with that, I will turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Autumn. She took some of my opening remarks, so we do a little bit of a repeat, but we'll just work through it. So good evening, Chair Stallard, members of the board. I mentioned the item before you relates to the YoloTD management project draft environmental document, which in this case is environmental impact report. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize Caltrans District 3 project delivery team, including Tej Patel, who's engineer and project manager for Caltrans District 3, and Deputy Director Greg Long. We also have Jeff Nazareno and Lauren Stafford from our WFD consulting team. They're available here for as a resource for any part of this conversation that we might need them, and they're participating remotely via Zoom. And finally, we have Kirk Trost, who's our legal counsel for the project, and he can speak to any CEQA or other project legal issues. So next slide, please, Heather. Now, if you recall, the draft environmental document was released on the same day as the November board meetings, which required, scheduling a full board discussion for this month. With that, we have several important topics to discuss with you and jointly with Caltrans District 3. So looking at the slide topics, Caltrans, as the YoloTD CEQA lead agency, will review the DEIR findings and the VMT mitigation plan. YoloTD will then share our justification for favoring one of the DEIR alternatives. And we will also share with you the results from our online survey, for which we've received up to over 1,500 responses as of today. And then we'll explain the critical path timeline between today and the spring. And then we'll return to the board for discussion and consideration of the staff recommendation. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Tej to share with us the findings of the EIR.
Welcome, by the way. We're glad to have you here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks for the kind words to Brian in the introduction, and good evening to the chair and to the board members. My name is Tej Patel. I'm a project manager, as Autumn and Brian introduced me, at Caltrans District 3 for the Yolo 80 managed lanes project. We can go to the next slide. So as Brian mentioned, the draft environmental impact report was released on November 13th for a minimum 45-day review period for public comments. But we actually provided 54 days to account for the holidays, with a final day for public comments to receive public comments of January 5th, 2024. So we'll be just going through a little bit of project description, the alternatives that are available in the draft EIR, some findings as they are related to environmental impacts, and ultimately the VMT mitigation plan. And the project description there, as you can see, is the project would add a managed lane on I-80 and US 50 by combination of lane conversion, restriping, and shoulder and median reconstruction with a concrete barrier. Next slide, please. So these are the alternatives. You'll actually find in the draft EIR that there are a total of 13, but they are broken out a little differently. So right now we're only showing 2 through 7. So we're showing 6 of them here. And I'm going to try to explain a little bit of what there might be a little confusion if anyone is reading it and seeing, well, why are there 13? What does a no build mean? So alternative 1 in the draft EIR, which is not listed on the screen there, is essentially, it's called a no build, which is always included in every draft environmental document that Caltrans puts out. It does nothing. It's continuing the existing situation. It's just a requirement that we include in our draft environmental documents. So alternatives 2A through 7A that you see on the screen there, they each have an associated B alternative, which means 2B through 7B are the exact same as 2A through 7A, with the only difference being the B alternatives have what's called a direct connector, which I'm going to describe that and show you a little bit of a pictorial representation in a couple of slides. That is essentially a separated structure that will connect the managed lane at the I-80 and US 50 interchange going eastbound and westbound. And hopefully the pictorial representation will bring that to life a little bit more. But alternative 2A is a high occupancy vehicle lane, HOV 2+, HOV also known as carpool lane. It's what we have all throughout the Sacramento region. The diamond lane, you'll see that on US 50, I-80 going into Placer County, Sacramento County, Yolo County. Alternative 3A, high occupancy toll or HOT 2+, essentially is just a toll lane. So it would be adding 1 toll lane with occupancy requirements that would require 2 drivers or 2 passengers or more to utilize the lane free. Any vehicle with less than 2 occupants would have to pay the toll to utilize the lane. Alternative 4A is the high occupancy toll 3+, the HOT 3+, which is the same exact toll lane as alternative 3A for the HOT 2+. However, the occupancy requirements are increased to have 3 occupants in the vehicle to utilize the lane for the toll lane for free. Any vehicle less than 3 occupants would pay the toll to utilize the lane. Alternative 5A is an express lane, which you'll see if anyone's driven out into the Bay Area on I-680, 880, I believe they've included some express lanes now. That is a toll lane where everyone pays, regardless of occupancy requirement. Could be 1, 2, 3, 4 people, you have to pay the toll. Alternative 6A is the transit, thank you. Alternative 6A is the transit only lane, which would be a lane dedicated to buses only. And alternative 7A is general purpose lane conversion to HOV 2+, meaning the existing configuration of the lanes would remain the same, but the number 1 lane would be repurposed to an HOV 2+. So rather than right now, the existing facility is 3 lanes in each direction. Alternatives 2A through 6A would be adding a lane to make it 4. Alternative 7 would remain the same amount of lanes, would be 3 lanes. But the number one, that I know I'm getting a little confusing now with the numbering. Number one lane would be converted from general purpose, which is just every mixed flow lanes into HOV 2+. Next slide, please. So we wanted to kind of give a little visual representation of what these alternatives look like. The alternative one you'll see at the top is the no build, keeping the existing conditions. And this is what we currently see out on the facility throughout the project limits. It's just 3 general purpose lanes in each direction. The middle picture is alternatives 2 through 6. And this is the same for A and B. 2A through 6A, 2B through 6B. This would construct a managed lane or add a managed lane in the median, which would increase the number of lanes from 3 to 4 in each direction. Alternative 7 is the bottom picture there, would repurpose the number 1 lane to a managed lane, which, as I was describing before, keeps the same number of lanes as the existing facility, but the number 1 lane would be converted from the general purpose to a managed lane. Next slide, please. Oh, no, you can keep going, it's like through it. So this is kind of the visual rendering that we wanted to show for what the direct connector actually is, what it looks like. You can keep kind of going through it again before. Perfect. So on the left, exactly. On the left, you'll see the existing condition as it is. This is at the I-80 and US 50 interchange. This is facing westbound towards Davis. And on the right, you'll see a rendering of what the managed lane direct connector would look like. So essentially, if you're coming eastbound from Davis towards Sacramento, that managed lane direct connector would, if you're in the number 1 lane, in the managed lane, let's say it's a toll lane. If you're in the toll lane, rather than weaving back over into the number 3 or 4 lane to get on the I-80 over the top connecting ramp, you would remain in the number 1 managed lane, in the toll lane, in your own structure ramp that would take you onto I-80 eastbound and to continue in the toll lane. So the purpose of that is to maintain operational benefits, reduce any weaving actions by anyone trying to stay in the toll lane, get over the last second to get over to the existing I-80 connector ramp. There could be some safety issues with that. So there's operational and safety benefits from this direct connector. Next slide. So these are some of the draft EIR findings from an environmental perspective. I'm not going to go through each one, but some of the highlights are that we wanted to point out were in regards to air quality, which you'll see the finding was less than significant in the draft EIR. Greenhouse gas emissions, less than significant or less than significant with mitigation, and that's dependent on the alternative. Each alternative sometimes had a different finding, a different CEQA impact. And population and housing was no impact or less than a significant impact. The one finding that did require some mitigation from the project was transportation related. And that was the finding from the CEQA impact was significant and unavoidable. And you'll see the double asterisk there with the note that it's significant and unavoidable for alternatives 2 through 5, but 6 and 7 were considered a lesser level of impact. Next slide. So what we did here's the actual finding from that the significant impact to transportation and to the vehicle miles traveled that would be induced into the corridor and will increase due to the project, due to the addition of a managed lane. This table is essentially, the numbers are basically the same, but the first 2 columns there, or columns 2 and 3, are just daily numbers. The last 2 columns, 4 and 5, are annual numbers. really the numbers that we were focusing on is the very last column. And we're focusing on alternatives 2 through 5. So you'll see that it's 128 million annual vehicle miles traveled that are induced into the corridor due to the project. That's what, and there's a footnote at the bottom that alternatives 2B through 5B, which again are the exact same as 2A through 5A, just including that direct connector. That has an annual induced VMT of 133 million. So that's the range that we're looking to mitigate for, 128 to 133 million on an annual basis. Next slide. So to comply with CEQA regulations, we have to try to mitigate for that 128 to 133 million annual VMT induced into the project. And so we came up with a VMT mitigation plan. This is proposed, this is in the draft EIR currently. Some of the details are currently under discussion with a lot of the partner agencies, with these local agencies that implement these measures and implement these projects, ultimately to come to a complete resolution with those partner agencies by the time we get to final EIR. As we're in the draft stage currently, this is the proposed plan. So the first program there you'll see is the voluntary trip reduction program in Yolo County, which is run by Yolo Commute. And the annual VMT reduced is just under 25 million. So it's a pretty substantial amount there. And the cost to implement it is about $4 million on an annual basis. So the proposed amount of contribution from the project towards this program would be $10 million over a 20-year period. And that's that second to last column from the right there. We'll get to it at the end, but overall for the VMT mitigation plan, what the Yolo 80 Managed Lanes project is proposing is to provide a total of $55 million in construction capital costs towards VMT mitigation. And so that's what this list of projects ultimately adds up to in terms of the dollar contribution amount. So that's 55 million, and we'll get to the end to see how much of the VMT will be reduced. The second project here is expanding the capital corridor frequency between Oakland and Sacramento, and that would reduce the VMT by 12.6 million on an annual basis. Next, please. Then we have the microtransit. The microtransit in Yolo County, which is operated and implemented by Yolo County and by Yolo Bus, and I'm sorry, City of Davis. And so the annual VMT.
No, it's us, it's Yolo Transit.
Oh, it's Yolo YTD. Apologies. There's too many of these swimming around in my head. So the annual VMT reduced is just over 6 million there. The next one, subsidizing monthly transit passes in Yolo County. We've had conversations with YPD, with YoloTD on this, for how to implement this and how this can be utilized and provided to members of the public. And we wanted to make sure that there's no overlap in some of the VMT reduction that's claimed from this measure versus the voluntary trip reduction program, which could potentially include the same. So those conversations are happening. That's part of the analysis that the double counting will not happen. So this is its own separate entity, its own separate program. So it gets about 5.6 million of annual VMT reduced. Next, please. Similar with the reducing of transit fares for Yolo Bus and Capital Corridor users in Yolo County. Just under 4 million annual VMT reduced. And then expanding the Causeway connection, Route 138, just above 3 million annual VMT reduced. And finally, the last two proposed are expanding Unitrans in the City of Davis, which is operated by UC Davis and the City of Davis, and building, helping fund the building of an overcrossing at the future Nishi student housing development site in Davis, which would connect this future development with, of course, access for students, which is basically fronting the UC Davis campus. So this gives us a total annual VMT reduction of just over 57 million, which is 43% of the induced VMT. That amount is about 133 million annual VMT that was mentioned earlier as the total induced into the corridor. So we would be able to mitigate for 57 million of that using that $55 million project contribution. Next slide, please. So we wanted to talk a little bit about some operational effects and benefits and the projected revenue. All of the data here in terms of congestion relief in the third column and the revenue in the fourth and fifth columns are based on the horizon year, which is 2049. So way out in the future for the project, this is what the analysis was based on. So again, alternatives 2A through 7A, as were described earlier, and you can see the number of time savings for each alternative. And the highest number of time savings is alternative 4A, which is the toll lane with the 3+ occupancy requirement. Gives you about 69 minutes of time savings to travel through the corridor. And the gross revenue, about 20.5 million. Net revenue estimate is 9.6 million. And the net revenue is all the revenue that is any excess after operating and maintenance costs are taken into account for the facility. Next slide. And I think that's it for me. I'll pass it back to Brian.
Thank you, Ted. So from a CEQA DMT standpoint, alternatives, 2 through 5 didn't really have much of a difference, right, from the DMT standpoint, but they do have operational differences between each other. And so that's why we're interested in sharing with you in this next slide, so, what staff's, preferences and why we support that preference. So, as you'll find in your recommendations, the staff does favor an alternative. It's one that we've been in discussion with Caltrans for some time now. And we've been going out to the community and discussing with them, in the context of all of the different alternatives. So what the HOT3+ lane can do relative to some of the other alternatives like the no build or the transit only lane is it will have an improved effect on traffic flow for all of the lanes, because you'll have one lane flowing smoothly, which is beneficial to all the other lanes. It also prioritizes higher occupancy vehicle and moves more people. That is, you get more people throughput versus vehicular throughput, which a general purpose lane would focus on. It does provide also an option for all drivers to avoid congestion when their value of travel time is high. I know there's a lot of discussion that occurs about who benefits and who doesn't benefit from hot lanes, but the research in the literature is pretty clear that all users do tend to use them when they need to, and very few people use them regularly. One of the major aspects of this alternative is that it will help provide funding for alternative travel options on the corridor, such as those mentioned in the VMT mitigation plan. In other words, the funding would be a sort of continuing source of funds once the initial investment from the capital project to get those projects started is exhausted. We'll also help fund equity in VMT mitigation programs. So there's some overlap between the two. But the project will need to develop an equity plan, and that equity plan may include projects that don't directly serve the core, value-added corridor itself, but communities adjacent to the corridor and nearby. And we believe that the HOT 3+ plan is most consistent with the December 21 project goals approved by the board. So I mentioned earlier we have an online survey. It's been out since the draft environmental document was released. Next slide. And keep in mind, this is a scientific survey. It's simply an open community survey that people will self-select into it. A little bit of background is that leading up to the first EIR meeting in West Sacramento, we had maybe about 70 responses, and then after the media coverage from the EIR meeting in West Sacramento, we had a major spike and got about, jumped up to probably 800, 900 responses the next day. So the media coverage definitely raised awareness about the project, raised the profile, and a lot of survey responses as a result. So what this slide shows you really is sort of what the proportion of survey responses, where they came from. And we have people where they live, where they work, and if they live and work in the same place. Majority of the respondents came from communities east of Yolo County. So we're talking about the Sacramento region. Just keep that in mind when you see the results. I will say though, that when you filter for any individual community, the results don't really change all that much. So take that for what it's worth. And the second highest responses came from the city of Davis, which is understandable, and then I believe followed by Woodland. So one of the first questions we asked the next day was how people actually use, and just to back up, we tried to ask questions that we felt like this board would want the answers to help with decision-making process, not, it kind of helps with where we are in the process right now. So one of those questions that we asked them was, how they use Interstate 80 as a traveler, and the vast majority of people either occasionally or regularly use Interstate 80, and they occasionally and rarely use other modes of transportation on Interstate 80. So the vast majority of respondents here are people who are driving on the freeway. Next slide, please. So we also asked them what they felt like the biggest issues were on the highway in Yolo County. And what I've done here is I've put little gray boxes around, the responses that correspond to some level of a problem. And you can see that 93% of the respondents felt like there was too much traffic, 82% that driving conditions were unsafe, 73% felt like there wasn't enough public transportation on the corridor, 56% felt like there was insufficient safe bicycling facilities, and then a majority also felt like there was too much residential cut-through traffic as a result of the congestion on the freeway. Next slide, Heather, please. And so then we shared with them that any new lane would have some usage rules associated with it. In other words, we didn't ask them if they were interested in a general purpose lane. We knew we would get that responses from them anyway. But what we wanted to get was their level of support for different rules and regulations on the new lanes. So what you can see here is that the highest level of support was actually for a carpool lane, typical 2+ carpool lane, which would theorize that it's something that people are familiar with and would be willing to accept. There's lower level of support for a lot of the other alternatives, including the 3+ hot lane, a carpool lane requiring 3 or more occupants, had about half the support of those requiring just 2 or more occupants. And then as you go down towards, express lane, converting existing fast lane to carpool lane, and the least favorite of all is the charging toll for everybody on the Causeway Bridge. So not a whole lot of support from these survey respondents for the managed lanes options, but we know that from a, transportation planning standpoint, that the general purpose lane is not the best way to manage, the highway. We also asked them some design and operational questions, just because we felt like that would be, useful for us as we're going through our concept of operations. Again, you have a lot of no's here, but it isn't clear if it's because they don't, if they don't support the individual, option, or if it's because they don't support tolling in general. So results from this question might not be as useful as they otherwise would be if we had selected from those who supported, the managed lanes options. Next slide, please. And of course, we were very upfront about the fact that full managed lanes would generate revenue, and that there are ways that we would propose to be spending that funding. And what I did here was I highlighted in those gray boxes the alternatives or the options which approached 50% or exceeded 50%. And so there's lots, considerably more support, for example, enhancing public bus service along I-80 than some of the other options. Making public transportation and capital corridor, sorry, it's kind of truncated here, but it's making it more affordable, that have lots of support. So considerable support for reducing the cost of traveling by public transportation on the 80 corridor. And then also receiving majority support was offering programs that promote commuting alternatives. Kind of in line with the fact that the biggest challenges that we have do tend to be during commute times, notwithstanding the weekend surges that we see. Okay, do you want to take a break there and answer any questions, or do you want to just kind of continue through the timeline? And
Just want this.
We'll take advantage of that break, I think.
And it's just real quick, on the, you made a point, that you're unsure for those who didn't or should support the options of what you would, I think, hold on for me, I can just, here it is. If toll carpool lanes are built, do you support the following options? So that one, is it possible, I have no idea how the data is configured, could you just do a cross tab?
yeah, we could filter out for those who supported the idea of managed lanes or toll managed lanes, and then recalc, get a,
Okay,
get
so
a
you
new
could.
figure for that.
Awesome.
That way we would know if they're the same, then we would know that it.
Perfect, that's it, thank you.
Okay. Shall we resume? Please continue,
All
Brian.
right, so that brings us to the timeline, and there's only one more slide after this. So this just kind of helps you understand the process as we move forward, and I think that the Autumn also has this slide or this exhibit in the next agenda item, but this kind of helps you understand what's occurring between now and March. So just looking at that, at the top row there in purple, that shows you how these sort of JPA and interagency governance conversations need to occur between now and January. That JPA does need to be formed in January to meet a lot of these milestones that we're in a very tight, compressed time frame for. The row in black there just sort of explains everything that's occurring kind of at the staff level behind the scenes. We need to have coordination with CTC staff on pre-application that will be submitted to them this week. The formal application will be due later in January. There needs to be a hearing for approval for establishing a tolling authority, and then in March is when the CTC would actually take action on that. I know that's not directly related to the EIR, but all of these things are intertwined with each other, and they all sort of need to occur in a specific sequence. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So circling back to recommendations, as you just know, just received a presentation from both Caltrans and us on the sort of relationship between the EIR and the project. The recommendation is also to receive public input, and then final recommendation is for the board to direct YoloTD staff to submit a letter to Caltrans affirming alternative number 4 as our preferred alternative for the Yolo project. And so I will stop there and happy to answer any questions. Oh wait, there's one more, sorry. one more page. And then looking ahead in January, all of those BMT mitigation projects that Gertz has referenced. We will, for those that implicate YoloTD, we'll be looking for the board to approve the commitment for those mitigation projects. And then in February, also referenced, I believe, by Autumn or Kirk earlier, is the FHWA term sheet, which would is sort of the agreement between FHWA and YoloTD for to access the infra funds that we have. I will leave it there.
Could we see the prior slide for a moment, please? During staff, submitted a letter to Caltrans affirming alternative for our preferred alternative. I just wanted to make sure. If that's a recommendation, is this an action we're going to be taking today, or is that an action we take at a future meeting?
So the action to recommend to Caltrans the preferred alternative would be today.
All right, thank you. I wasn't quite sure there was an action. All right, well, we have received the presentation. Keep this away from it. All right, we've done the first two. The third item is the letter regarding our preferred alternative. We can go to public comment before we go to board comment, if that's agreeable. Okay, then it's time for public comment. Welcome our public here to share their views. Alan Hirsch. Yeah, 3 minutes, my friend.
Thank you. I have about 15 comments here. First place, how can you improve an EIR when you it hasn't been perfected? You haven't taken the public input to correct the errors. This is an unpeer reviewed document. The numbers and calculations are not been affirmed and been from other experts. You can't make a decision based on this because you don't have the final numbers. It's like making a medical decision on a peer reviewed drug test that hasn't been confirmed. There's been not adequate public input yet. You're basically making a decision before you've gotten all the public input. Copies of the EIR were not at the public library in Davis in West Sacramento until 3 days ago. Excuse me, until last Wednesday, I believe. You obtain a copy of the EIR on the internet. You need to download 26 different documents and then request an additional document. So how the survey could be based on any data, which is not available on the website, is nothing. So the survey is just a beauty contrast. It doesn't really reflect the EIR. And the implication that this is real input for the EIR substantive is not true. The HOV3 plus favors Tahoe travelers over workers in Davis. And Caltrans CMCP study basically said there was almost no influence on travel behavior by making HOV lanes. So this would not improve that throughput. The same people who are doing 3 cars would be still in 3 cars. No one would basically change their behavior. Trivial. That's Caltrans' own number on the CMCP for I-80. So this is nothing. I don't believe this will fix cut-through traffic significantly. It will come back again when it recongest with induced demand. It does not fix cut-through traffic. You guys will all be gone at your next job, but this is what's going to happen. The mitigation basically is effectively giving up on zero carbon for Davis and Yolo County. And this project was not reviewed. The projects are supposed to be using the INVAR and the EIR for conformity with the local plan. It was not reviewed with the climate plan. I think that's a substantive mistake that you have to reject the draft EIR as a result of that. The policy, the poll policy, you haven't proven out that phase 1 will be mitigated. You haven't with the entire project. It is unclear whether phase 2, phase 3, or how many other phases of R will ever be funded. So basically, you need to prove out that phase 1 is being mitigated. I'm not sure it has been. Less an impact on housing. Adding a freeway won't it change housing patterns and land use patterns? Does that make any sense? We know freeways are sprawl inducing. Widening your freeway, making people drive you, well, obviously it makes sprawl inducing. That's lots of literature on that. This is not a substantial EI. That's not a substantial finding, please. It's just not, this is just not ready for, you should not make a decision tonight, particularly because you told the public they had input until January 5th, and you're making the decision prematurely tonight. Please do not decide tonight. It is not good form. I also will note that this was on the calendar. This public hearing was supposed to begin at 7, but you began it at 6:30. So people came in late, they didn't know. I don't think this is good form. I don't think it's good practice. We need to build trust in our government. It's so fragile. Our democracy is so fragile now. And this is not good practice, what you're doing now. This is not open, this is not really good practice. Please don't do this tonight. Please don't embarrass yourself. This is just not right. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Next speaker, anyone else wish to comment? Welcome.
Hi, my name is Stephen Wheeler. I'm a professor of urban planning and urban and regional planning at UC Davis. As you probably know, transportation is the single largest source of California's greenhouse gas emissions, and also the area in which we are making the least progress. Traffic keeps rising in large part because Caltrans keeps widening roads rather than considering other alternatives. If induced travel is taken into account, widening I-80 in Yolo County will add at least 79,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions annually, equivalent to increasing Davis emissions by at least 14%, or unincorporated Yolo County emissions by at least 7.3%. I-80 widening will probably undo whatever benefits have resulted from climate action plans in Yolo County and the city of Davis over the past 15 years, including the formation of Valley Clean Energy. Thus, this is likely to be the most important environmental decision any of you make in your political lifetimes. If you want to call yourself environmental or climate leaders in the future, you can't support this project. And you need to take action now to bring about a better alternative. The first step would be to withhold YCTD's consent from the DEIR. There are many good reasons to do so, especially since Caltrans did a very poor job on the document. The first is that a good range of alternatives wasn't studied, including a multi-laned tolled facility as YCTD staff requested. A second is that Caltrans modeling ignores induced traffic and is thus utterly inadequate. A third is that proposed mitigations only cover 43% of the VMT increase. And a fourth is that the document falsely states that the project would have no impact on urban growth, air pollutants, and energy demand, and less than significant impacts on greenhouse gases and state climate policy. So at this meeting, instead of directing staff to submit a letter affirming alternative 4, please direct staff to develop a letter asking that the DER be improved and recirculated. Next year, you will also need to refuse to release funds YCTD controls for the project. Yes, it's unfortunate to lose $86 million from the misguided application for managed lanes that your agency submitted previously. But better to lose that money than to pursue a bad project that greatly increases VMT and greenhouse gas emissions in violation of state and local policy. In contrast to spending up to $436 million to widen the freeway, a project simply pricing all existing lanes while constructing bus bypass lanes
Yes, sir.
I would like to finish, please, could make at least $300 million a year, money that could then be used for transit and affordable housing near jobs.
All right. You've hit your.
Finally, I'm just going to take 30 more seconds.
You're not getting 30 seconds for you.
I don't
3
see
minutes.
any groundswell of public opinion here.
You know, we have a rule here and most people respect our
Finally,
rules.
starting now, you need to approach your colleagues on
Or we
local
don't have
city
a sheriff
councils
here,
and in the legislature to develop a strategy around a better project. And then go to the governor to get his assistance in forging a new process so that it can come about. If you consider yourself sensitive to current climate and environmental needs, you can't let the project go forward, and you need to actively work to bring about a better alternative. Please don't force the environmental community to take you to court to try to bring about a
Sir, you
climate
have shown a
responsible
lack of respect
solution
for the rules
that
we
you
have in
should
this
have been on the
organization.
table in the
I've
first
asked you
place.
to stop speaking and to sit
Thank you.
down. Thank you, finally, for sitting down. All right, does anyone else wish to come forward and speak? Bapu, welcome. Mr. Bapu Baitla with Davis City.
Davis City Council, I'm speaking as an individual. Thank you for hearing me out tonight. I'm just going to lead with the most important points in the recommendation, which is to urge you to request a deeper analysis of alternative 6A, which is a transit alternative that incorporates projections for different trends of increased transit supply to the 2049 horizon, and also models changes in single occupancy vehicle demand with respect to transit supply. Also, I realize it's late in the game to be pursuing other alternatives. I share the feelings of the previous public commenter that the request to look at tolling lanes seems essential to understand what alternatives on the table, particularly if we're concerned about VMT and in conjunction with transit. I just want to say, build alternatives 2 to 5, 181 million miles VMT. That's could be an underestimate based on other figures. UC Davis puts it at 234 million. If I might be wrong on this, I was trying to find data for, to put that into context. And that seems like the annual, it looks like the annual miles traveled in vehicle miles traveled in Davis for a year. So that it's significant. That's the level of induced demand is significant. And the greenhouse gas impacts that are inferred from that increase in VMT are based on some projections of fuel efficiency improvements and rates of EV adoption that frankly might be quite unrealistic. But even so, if we accept the numbers, Caltrans manages to mitigate less than half of VMT here. And that to me is problematic. And when I requested thinking about alternative 6A and getting a deeper analysis of that, when I look at the report, it seems inconsistent in the attributed VMT impact of that alternative. In some places, it states that it can't be analyzed, but when you look at the technical memo by fair peers, some of the mitigation measures do have VMT associated with them, and those mitigation measures are linked to increased transit. So clearly, analysis can be done about the impacts of increased transit on VMT. But more worryingly, as far as I can tell, there's no analysis of what happens, not just when you build a transit lane, but when you build a transit lane and also invest in increased supply of transit. It doesn't make much sense to build a bus lane and then have the same 6 to 8 buses an hour that we have now. That to me seems like a reasonable comparison. It seems like jurisdictions would face major incentives for funding that increased transit supply, and the 55 million that Caltrans is putting out for mitigation, one imagines in a transit-only scenario, a good chunk of that funding, even more than it is now, would go towards increased transit. But that 55 million might not be necessary because the induced VMT would be, in theory, a lot less if we had greater transit, meaning people would be pulled out of cars and onto buses. So, we could most likely mitigate a lot higher fraction than 43% if we could have increased transit supply. So, the larger point is, nowhere in the world ever has freeway widening been a long-term solution to congestion. Nowhere, anywhere. It just doesn't work. It relieves congestion in the short term, and it makes things worse in the long term in terms of VMT and greenhouse gases. So I would say, solutions are clear. It's public transit and mixed use zoning. I would urge you to consider taking the first step in those solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bapu. Next speaker. Welcome.
Good evening. I'm Ken Wagstaff, and I'm a former mayor of Davis and a former member of this board. It is a shame that we're down to such a short time period for the public to consider these options and to make their comments. I guess I'm not familiar with the constraints that you face as you try to build this timetable, so I don't want to be critical about that. But I just want to say that from a common sense standpoint, looking at traffic sitting in as an attempt to wind through Davis, mostly just sits there for good chunks of the day, we're getting a lot of air pollution from that in Davis, and it seems to me that that's a consideration. I don't know whether that was all taken into account in terms of the analysis of the air pollution, but I'm sort of surprised to hear some of those figures, given the fact that I think traffic is not just sitting there generating pollution, is going to be eased with this project. I tend to favor whatever you can do to get an express lane going between Davis and Sacramento. Most of the people who were present at the workshop that took place at the community church this week, just this past week, when asked to express their feeling about that, raise their hand in favor of an express bus lane. There is an odd situation where traffic narrows, comes from Solano County into Yolo County, narrows down to 3 lanes. Davis carries the brunt of that impact. I think that if there were time to look at other options that could be enhancing alternatives, maybe that'd be best. But what we've got is a situation where we might have to give about 85 million bucks back to the feds if we don't figure out an efficient way to use it. We need more express buses. I think I'm very interested in a toll plaza there that would ultimately govern traffic on the bridge. But I think that if you were to effectively implement an express lane for buses and high-capacity vehicles, 3+, you still have the opportunity in the future to manage this even on a tighter basis and to manage it for everybody. So appreciate the courage you have as you go forward here, trying to do something that certainly a lot of environmentally oriented people in Davis just think more cars is a bad thing. Well, more cars are here. They congest at Davis and sit there. So I look forward to this board's action to relieve that congestion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ken. Friends, are there anyone else wishes to speak tonight? All right, we'll close the public comment.
online.
Oh, excuse me, we have online comments. Thank you. Please identify yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, your name, please.
Yes, I'm Andy Ferrillo. I am a member of the YoloTD Citizens Advisory Committee, as well as the Davis Bicycling Transportation and Street Safety Commission. So I'd like to thank you all for the presentation and thank staff for the presentation, and thanks to you all for considering this item this evening. I would like to express my support for alternative 6, the transit lane alternative, as that is the only option that would guarantee that this project would provide a fast, reliable, and affordable transportation option between Davis and Sacramento that anyone could use. But I would like to recommend a few tweaks to that option that would make it work better for transit. Firstly, I'd like to recommend that the lane's alignment that it be built where the transit is. Specifically, right now, the current alternative 6 proposes like 5 miles of new transit lane between the 80-50 split and West El Camino Avenue, where there's no existing or proposed transit service, so that lane would just be sitting there empty if the transit lane alternative were chosen. So I'd like to recommend that be removed from that alternative, as that would save quite a bit of money. And then also to that end, that the transit lane connector be moved from the 80-50 split, because again, that would be unused by any existing or proposed transit, and move to the Mace interchange in Davis, which is a chronic point for delays for both Yolo bus getting on the highway, as well as Unitrans, because Unitrans get stuck in the queues of traffic waiting to get on the highway. Also, I think also one unfortunate reality of the current like federal and state funding programs is that like new transit surface would only be funded directly through this project if a car infrastructure project that induces vehicle miles traveled is built, which is again quite unfortunate. But that doesn't mean that so I'd like to see if the transit lane alternative were chosen. I would like to see you all commit to funding that transit service increase package through existing sources. One great option is the local fund from the Transportation Development Act. That fund often gets diverted to local streets and roads, but was intended, the legislature intends that fund to be used for transit, and it's one of the few sources that can be used for transit operations today, and would be a great source for a lot of those service increases. And also, regardless of the alternative chosen, an increase to line 42 needs to be part of the service increase package, the transit service increases that come with this project. Currently that was excluded from that package, and those numbers just seem off to me. The EIR says that it would cost $16 million per year to have 15-minute peak hour service on line 42, compared to just about $800,000 per year for a similar service increase on the Causeway connection, which is a parallel route, which again, that just doesn't those numbers just don't seem to add up. So I'd like to ask you to check those calculations. And then in general, just that line 42, it's really the workhorse for transit on this corridor. I mean, it goes all through Davis, through West Sacramento. And then last but not least, so can I wrap up really quick?
Yes, quick.
Thank you. And then last but not least, I'd like to ask that, I mean, currently biking across the causeway, I've seen like pieces with the current construction going on, I've seen like pieces of car bumpers on the path, like pieces of the fence broken or missing. So I'd like to recommend that any MOU for obligating funds for this project require Caltrans to restore the shoulder for the safety of bike users. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Again, thank you for serving on our advisory committee. So was there additional public comment?
Yes, we have Christine.
Welcome, Christine.
Welcome. So my name is Christine Kimball Shoemaker. I'm a retired scientist and a longtime climate activist in Woodland. And for 5.5 years, I was on the CAC for Valley Clean Energy. I served as chair and vice chair during that time. My passion there was focusing on clean electricity. We can't look at that in isolation, and transportation is key to overall reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I attended the teach-in last week with Ms. Bernstein, Dr. Handy, Dr. Wheeler, and others. And both speakers, Dr. Handy and Dr. Wheeler, emphasized the importance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and reducing VMT, and to consider alternatives, to break the old car way and look at ways to encourage folks not to drive. It's important to reduce VMT, not just switch to all electric. There are a variety of reasons for this, including embedded carbon in vehicles. But another reason is that as we transition to clean electricity, it is important to use the clean electricity efficiently. So my guess is that a bus with 20 folks on it will use far less electricity than 20 EVs. And at a large scale, it's the clean electricity amount that you have divided by the total load that gives you your percent clean. So you want to keep the denominator lower by using efficiently. But this is not an argument to slow the transition to all electric, just need to use it efficiently. So after thinking about this, and I do think the researchers from UCD are to be paid attention to, I would prefer not doing it at all and focus on new alternatives, encouraging folks not to drive, changing the car culture. Short of that, the only alternative I would favor is number 6, a new lane for public transit and buses only. If you build it, the buses will come. And I would like to see, if possible, for that also to include tolling with equity and the number of people in the cars in mind. So I want to thank you, and thank you for taking our comments. This is a major decision. We all have a responsibility to get this right. Infrastructure decisions such as this stay with us for a long time, and we are in for a big fight on climate. And as Mr. Hirsch mentioned, we need to review this in light of climate and the climate plans. Yolo County per se has a very aggressive goal of net negative by 2030. And also, as others has mentioned, since this was released and now, a lot of the public comment has not come in. I really don't think it's the time to make the decision for which lane you want. Anyway, thank you, and onward on climate.
Thank you, Christine, for all your public service. Additional comments?
One last one, NJ?
NJ?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes?
3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'll be as brief as I can. So my name is NJ Mvondo. I'm the chair of the Yolo County Climate Action Commission, but I'm speaking on my behalf tonight. I would like to thank everyone involved in all the work that has been done, all the research, and also, members of the public. I just want to remind, I think that we are looking at this as an issue in big part because our behavior, human behaviors and public transportation, the fact that right now, the way public transportation, the services are being offered is not really meeting the demand. So my hope is that, ideally, there will be a huge emphasis on how we're going to improve on that front. But also, as several of my colleagues before mentioned, I understand that anyway, there is an expiration date on the money. If the project absolutely has to move forward, I'll be supporting the option 6. But again, I just want to continue to urge you to, as much as you can, offer, have not just a lane dedicated to buses, but also make sure that the buses are equipped to carry enough bikes on it, as that's a preferred mode of transportation for several people who are willing to take the bike to Sacramento and other places. But again, please, as much as possible in all the decisions you're making, reach out to the cities that are impacted regarding the cap, the impact on the cap, just so that we're able to have a conversation on that. That was a bit missing on my end. And last but not least, again, emphasis once more time on more public transportation services, of course, with renewable energy, but this is sorely needed in our county. I thank you all again for your work. And that's all my comment.
Thank you, NJ. We appreciate comments from the public. We do ask you respect our time limit for obvious reasons. We are happy to receive written comments as well. So if there's anything that wasn't said tonight, you can submit it to us. It'll be circulated to us by our staff. No further comments from the room or online. With that, then we'll close public comment on the issue and proceed for discussion from the board. Someone wish to comment from the board?
I could have a just early clarifying question. This might be for Caltrans. It's the slides and comment is on the slides, not on the EIR. I don't know if this is in the EIR, but for instance, page 16 of the slide. Those are calculations very easy to follow. And if we could bring that up, that'd be great.
Is that Matt, what's the slide title?
Yolo 80 managed lane update VMP mitigation plan.
Give me a page number, sir.
16.
16. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, there we go. So cost to construct or implement, it says 1.5 million annual cost and then 7.5 million over 5 years. So I can see there the arithmetic to get from 1.5 to the 7.5. If we go then to the prior slide, slide 15, and I think it's just a error in the slide. The top line there says $4 million annual cost. And then next to it, the cell says 10 million over 20 years. And I would have expected it to say 80 million over 20 years. Multiplying 4 million per year. That's 20 years. Then instead the total says 10 million. So I wonder if it was just intended to be just a 3-year mitigation, like the one below it.
Test has a clarification to offer.
Yes, but it is a little misleading. So that the cost to construct or implement is simply just the annual cost of the program. Each contribution is different. Where some programs, we would be able to provide a contribution that would cover the entire annual cost, and others would not cover the entire annual cost. And that's the case in this, and for this voluntary trip reduction as well. So your math was correct that if we were to cover the annual cost of 4 million over the entire 20 years, it would be 80 million, but we won't be covering the entire annual cost. It would be whatever that, it would be 500,000 on an annual basis. And so the voluntary trip reduction program would likely try to seek other matching funds to come up with their entire annual program.
Okay. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. A quick follow-up on that. So then does the annual VMT reduce, that number stays the same?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Early.
So I have no idea who I should be addressing. So I'll address the room. tag in. So on the equity program, I want to make sure I heard right, that we would have an opportunity, if this went through, then we would be digging into what an equity program would look like. I want to kind of get a better sense of the timing on that, because I will tell you in West Sacramento, right, like what we heard was a lot about equity, right? And so I just want to make sure we'd have an opportunity to really dig into that and address it.
Yeah, great question. So the equity development of the equity program, the cost to actually develop the program was built into the $2 million grant application that we provided to SACOG and that was funded. So that work is actually funded. So we will be moving forward with that. That's one of the things that would kind of happen after we get to April. It would be in the same time horizon as developing our toll ordinance, for example. So it's all the work that would happen. And once we get through this kind of critical environmental review design, and then it would really happen kind of concurrently with construction.
And what would this board's role be in that construction of the equity program?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my thought on that, although I don't think we've really discussed it, would be that actually the new JPA itself, since they are the ones who will be implementing all of the toll ordinance and overseeing all of it, they would actually be the ones who would be overseeing the development of that equity program.
Okay, so it actually wouldn't be this board, but a separate authority that would have been created after this.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I haven't really thought that much about it because we were the ones who received the grant from SACOG.
Yes,
given that,
that's right.
Yeah. So, but given that it would be the toll authority's responsibility to implement the tolling, I would think we would want to do that. They would be the ones we would want to have do that. But frankly, I haven't really thought that far ahead. So thank you for raising the question. Is it right? Okay, the lawyers are telling me that's right.
That it would be the toll authority to do that. Yeah, I appreciate Dr. Early's question, because I mean, I had noted that part of Brian's presentation, and I was curious about the timing of that, but also, you know, obviously like San Mateo County has just done a similar program as well, the express lanes down there, and developed and released their sort of their equity program around that. So I was curious about that. I think also the other question, though, particularly if it's a separate item this evening, around the tolling authority, but if it were to be created, you know, the first, obviously the first segment of toll lanes, express lanes in the region would be in Yolo County. And so I'm a little worried about the, you know, thought that the tolling authority admittedly there might be a future expansion of sort of express lanes in the region, but at least initially, you know, having a number of individuals who might not have any connection to Yolo County making the decisions on what the equity program should look like. I mean, I think that is, and particularly there's two cities, there's the county too, but two cities in particular, right, that are directly impacted by the proposed project. So curious about just sort of how, you know, that decision, I guess legally it ends up having to be the tolling authority, but it feels like, why are folks from other parts of the region making the decisions about what the equity program looks like when the primary effects are on the local jurisdictions, you know, within Yolo County?
Can I respond? So, you know, we are getting into agenda item 7 here.
My bad.
But
No fault.
no, I mean, it's all connected. So, you know, so I would say that, I mean, this is part of the reason in developing this JPA that we wanted to make sure that we were proposing a structure where Yolo County would retain the majority of the votes while we are the only project. And so I think the good news, at least with the draft that we have, if that's ultimately the one that is adopted, is that that is the case, that Yolo County would essentially have 3 seats. There would be one other seat that would be not from Yolo County, and then 1 or 2 seats from Caltrans, depending on how that issue gets resolved. So, you know, it would really be in that instance, that is the agreement that goes forward, it would still be majority Yolo.
All right, well, we will get to them, item number 7 shortly. All right, additional comment from the board?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, please.
A couple quick questions, clarification. Can you address the timeline that we're laying there? A couple public commenters that talked about not doing this tonight. Can you lay out why this is before us this evening and what the possibilities are if it needs to take this up later?
Yeah, so I want to be really clear that we don't have the power to decide what this project is going to be. That is a Caltrans decision. In our conversations, we thought it was important for us to take advantage of this time when we have the EIR in front of us to offer our feedback to Caltrans on which alternative we think is best. This is the right time to do that right now. Because Caltrans is soliciting input at this time. And so this is the last board meeting that will happen prior to the close of public comments on the EIR. And then Caltrans will then certify the EIR. We don't know that we will have another opportunity to actually weigh in with Caltrans in a formal way. And so that's why staff has recommended this, to take this action tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, and just another piece I just want to touch on, just around this board's ability, when you look at that timeline, it's obviously a tight timeline, we want to go down that path again, but where do we weigh in again? Where does this board have the ability, once Caltrans closes their process, to still have an influence on decisions that are being made as this timeline plays out?
Yeah, I mean, as the lead agency, Caltrans ultimately will make the final decision about which alternative they want to move forward. Now, as the recipient of the $86 million infra grant, we do have the opportunity this board will have to decide, are we comfortable with this project? And are we then willing to sign an agreement with the federal government and with Caltrans to go ahead and authorize and move those funds forward? There is a theoretical situation that could happen where Caltrans selected an alternative that this board is not comfortable with. We then could say, hey, we're not comfortable moving this forward. We don't like the alternative that's been chosen, and we're not going to take that action to authorize the use of those $86 million.
Thank you. I just wanted those timelines to be clear, given the comments that we've heard this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chapman. And,
Yeah, thank you for here. Just one other, so I think the follow-on question is around the issue of responsible agency. So Caltrans is the lead agency in this regard, but particularly with regard to this particular project and this draft environmental impact report, in terms of responsible agency, I mean, the typical process is that responsible agency makes the comment or comments, but particularly, around, there's a whole range of alternatives. And sort of, that is a pretty typical process for, responsible agencies to sort of weigh in, even, again, a part of the public comment process is not completed yet, in terms of the members of the public submitting comments to Caltrans for sort of to be addressed. But that sort of responsible agency sort of component of making comments on preferred alternatives is a pretty typical one. Is that not?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, as a responsible agency, we do have the responsibility, if you will, to make our preferences and feelings known, and as a good partner too. If we did not tell Caltrans which project alternative we preferred, and then they picked the wrong one, they can't, then that's on us for not actually going on the record and telling them which project we prefer. So I think we have not only a responsibility as a responsible agency, but also as a good partner, to make our wishes clear to Caltrans and to go on the record in terms of, what we think is best.
Well, thank you for the discussion. Additional questions or comments? Ready to go.
I'm on the fence.
Okay.
I'm on the fence about a kind of clarifying, what we're doing, in the sense that, if I was thinking locally and I was from Davis, I would be thinking about commuters from Davis to Sacramento, and my scope would be commuters. But I'm just asking to clarify that. But my scope in my decision-making tonight, or when looking at these projects, is people coming off ships in the Bay Area, bringing trucks, transit, goods of various sizes, people going way past Sacramento, Placerville, Northern California, I-5, like all these other places. So my scope of who I'm concerned with making a decision for isn't specifically just commuters from a small area, but it's all the uses for transportation, for being able to provide better travel for all those goods and services, not just commuters. Is that right?
One of the things that we know about this corridor is that the majority of trips do not start or end in Yolo County. The majority of trips in this corridor are interregional trips. They're people traveling. This is the land bridge between Sacramento and the Bay Area, right? And we saw, why are so many people from Sacramento County taking our survey? It's because they travel this corridor even though they don't live in Yolo County. And so I think I think we do have a responsibility to think about the entire corridor and to think about all the users of this corridor. Housing prices in the Bay Area have driven many people to live east of the causeway, who work west of the causeway, the super commuters who commute 2 to 3 hours each way because they are priced out of the Bay Area and they choose to live in a place where they can afford. So, in terms of just thinking about who is impacted by this corridor, we do know the data tells us that the majority of people who travel on this corridor do not actually live in Yolo County. So I wouldn't tell you who it's important for you to represent. You represent who you represent, but just in terms of what the data does tell us, this is much bigger than just Yolo.
Thank you. That was a good discussion as well. Thank you. Any additional points we made? Yes.
Could I ask one more? Take a second.
Please proceed.
Just to clarify, this is maybe getting a step ahead, but it's just thinking long term. This is federal money, which is the Managed Lanes project. And if the money wasn't accepted, it would return to the federal government and could be used anywhere. And it wouldn't necessarily be light rail in St. Louis. It could be old fashioned freeway widening in Minnesota or somewhere else. Is that the right way to say it?
That's correct.
Okay.
All right, we've had, I'd say, a robust discussion and time now to determine our action. Is there a motion?
Early moves to accept the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a second to Dr. Rui's motion?
I will second the motion.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to accept the staff recommendation that we express our preference for option 4A. Correctly stated?
Staff is not providing a recommendation on whether it's A or B.
Okay.
So, yes, we're staying.
Alternative 4.
Yes.
Forget the A. All right. We've had a clarification of the motion. Additional questions or comments from anyone? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Thank you for everyone. And we will move on to item 7, discuss the Yolo 80 tolling authority application and the JPA permission.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will give the presentation. And I also want to thank our special counsel, Mr. Cho, for being here tonight. He's been a key author, I would say, of what's in front of you, and so appreciate him being here and want to make sure let you know he's available for questions as well. So what we're going to be talking about with this agenda item is to provide an update. This is an informational update, not an action item, on the Yolo 80 Managed Lanes Tolling Authority application and JPA formation. So if we could go to the next slide. So here you see the top line shows you what a typical highway project delivery timeline looks like. You have the planning phase in blue, you have the environmental phase, the design phase, and then the construction phase. That is what a typical highway development project looks like. Tonight, what we're doing, when you add tolling into the mix, is the whole thing gets a lot more complicated. And so the lower arrow shows you all of the different steps that are required if you're going to deliver a toll project. So it includes things like a concept of operations, traffic and revenue study, securing AB 194 tolling authority application. All the things in blue are the things that are complete, and all of the orange things, the things that are in orange are the things that are in progress, and everything that is grayed out are the things that we have not yet started. And I want to emphasize that this is normally like a 5-year process, and we are doing all of this in, the span of approximately a year. Next slide. So I want to say a little bit about the AB 194 tolling authority process. So this is the process by which the California Transportation Commission decides whether or not to grant tolling authority for this project. So there's about a 60-page project, including appendices, that has a bunch of technical analysis, and our consultants from WSP, Jeff Nazarino and Lauren Stafford, who are still online here and available to answer questions. They've been really the lead on developing that application along with support from Caltrans. It has a whole host of predefined sections based on the requirements, and it must be submitted by the entity that is requesting tolling authority, and that's an important point. So the application must be submitted, and then there has to be a public hearing after the application is submitted that is arranged by the CTC staff. It's got to be located near the project, and it has to occur after the application is submitted and prior to the CTC making a decision on that application. And then the CTC itself will get an informational item with a presentation by the applicant, and then they will get an action item with a presentation from CTC staff, where CTC basically says, we've reviewed the application and we have a recommendation on whether or not you should approve it. So that's what that process looks like. Next slide. So, a key piece of that is it must be the entity that will oversee the tolling that actually submits the application, which then leads to the next question. Well, who is that entity going to be? Well, under AB 194, there are three options. The first is that the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, or RTPA, where the project is located, is the tolling authority. In our case, that is SACOG. SACOG is the RTPA for Yolo County. The second option is a joint powers authority with the consent of the RTPA. And a joint powers authority is, by definition, essentially a partnership between multiple agencies. And the third option is Caltrans. Caltrans, under the statute, does have the option of unilaterally becoming a tolling authority, or I should say applying for a tolling authority, although their application, just like everyone else's, would also need to be approved by the California Transportation Commission. So those are the three choices that we have. Next slide. Now, I think it's just important to take a step back and remember that we are not, while we are the first, we are not the only tolling project that is envisioned for the Sacramento region. So this map actually shows what was adopted as part of the last MPPFCS in terms of toll projects for the Sacramento region. So everything in blue is a 2-lane tolling project. The ones in green are a 1-lane tolling project, and then the ones that are in pink are a variable or kind of reversible lane concept. So again, these are what the MTP is envisioning over the course of decades. We are very much the only project that is ready to go. But over the coming years, we expect other projects will be coming along, including probably next one will be I-5 in Sacramento County, which is currently under planning but does not have any funding for construction. So the reason that I bring this up is it's important for us to recognize the regional context for what we're doing here. We are not an island. We are part of a region, and there are other projects following behind. Next slide. And so what that means, what we have in the conversations that we've been having for many months with our partners at Caltrans and SACOG, and frankly, the other counties in the Sacramento region, is to see if we can come up with a regional approach to tolling that both in the early days, when we're the only project, protects our ability to control our project, but then also would allow that tolling authority to grow over time as other projects in other counties are ready to go. So the proposed approach that you have in your packet would have, initially, it would have 2 seats from SACOG. One of those would be an at-large seat, that could be like the SACOG board president. It could be anybody from anywhere in SACOG. And then one would be from Yolo County. YoloTD, our board, would appoint 2 seats to that. And then Caltrans TBD, Caltrans has, and I'll let them speak for themselves, when we get there, they have requested 2 seats on the JPA, and that is something that, that I think this board, as well as the SACOG board, we all need to decide and discuss and decide together. As future counties are ready to join the tolling authority, the proposal that we have would be that each of those counties would get the same deal Yolo gets. Their local transportation agency would appoint 2 seats, and then the SACOG board would appoint 1 seat also from that county. So SACOG would always have 1 at-large, and then they would always have 1 representative from each county that has joined the tolling authority. So it's a bit of a complicated structure, but I think what I like about this is it's a kind of elegant solution that again gives us kind of a majority in the early days, but then gives every other county, the same fair shake when they come in. Next slide. Is that the end of the slides? Okay. Again, this is an informational item to update you on where we are. After tonight, the next steps for this process, in fact, I had the timeline, but I didn't actually put it in the slide deck. The same timeline that Brian showed you. I won't go back to it, but essentially the key next steps are after tonight, this would come back to the SACOG board and this board for a vote in January. My hope and expectation is between now and then, we'd have an opportunity to have an additional conversation with Caltrans and SACOG to get to some agreement on a proposal that all three agencies are satisfied with regard to Caltrans's role. There's also been some questions that have come up around Sacramento County and its participation that I know SACOG is fielding, and I think will be a part of those conversations as well. So let me pause and see what questions you have.
I'll start it off by respectfully saying that whoever comes from Caltrans is gonna state the party line, whatever it is. Caltrans, why do we need two people to state the party line? You know,
I heard someone say that today.
pardon me? You thought the same thing?
I heard the same thing today, actually.
Yeah,
I did too.
it's just, I mean, we value staff input. It's unusual when staff actually sits with elected people, and it's not unusual for them to have a vote other than be ex officio. So that's what we're used to. And as an elected person, I'm sort of jealous of our sovereignty as having put our eyes out in front of the voters and let them say yes or no. And that's not the case for somebody that comes from an agency. So I'm just being real honest with you that I think one person should be there and assertive and speak up for Caltrans. And you guys have a lot of ways of being persuasive, but the rest of us kids a whole lot of money. So I'm just being frank about that. So I don't think you need a vote. I don't think you need two of you to do it. So there's my input. Anybody else want to weigh in?
Duly noted.
Duly noted.
Go ahead. You guys down and send, yeah. Go ahead.
Go this way. All right. I just wanted to note some of the talking points. So I serve on the transportation committee for SACOG, and of course, SACOG met today, but that's kind of a double dose of presentations on this. And one of the points that Kathleen Hanley, who presented it for SACOG, made, I thought was really important to bring up tonight, and that is that what we're building is a facility for use. And as a facility for use, it is a regional asset. And as a regional asset, we should form a JPA to oversee that. It should be have a regional approach in order to oversee that asset. I thought that was really worth mentioning. And then the other one is that I did hear the same kind of parallel comment to what Tom said, is that an agency like Caltrans has a formation of being top down, that's how they're scaffolded. And so one representative overall could be the representative of that voice. Just saying that's what I heard. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes,
You have
please.
okay, I just wanted to make sure before I jumped in. So I too, I sit on the transportation committee, and then also am the alternate on both actually for the board of directors for SACOG as well. And it's interesting. I went into that conversation kind of agnostic, quite frankly, about Caltrans having a vote, even though Greg is my left buddy here. We bonded over Kumon. He's my seatmate. But really was convinced regarding the need to because so much of the complexity around the MOUs, around the funding, and the sheer work that we're gonna all need to do in order to make this work. Caltrans is going to be a part of it. That it would be extremely helpful to be dealing not just with staff, but executive level staff. And by having an executive level individual at the table with us, as a voting member at the table with us, that we would have access to that. And Greg all but stated that, and Greg, I'd love for you to state it again, so my colleagues could hear it too. And so I think that would be extremely helpful as we are working to move things forward that are going to need to be timely. And so no longer agnostic, but would encourage us to support a Caltrans voting member. And what I would also say is agree that I do not see a world in which two Caltrans staff would be voting against each other. And so one absolutely seems reasonable, two seems like it would be duplicative. So some other things that I want to make sure that sort of holding this seat as a board of director for YTD that I highlight would be, I agree that this, especially since it's starting in Yolo, that the body should largely be represented by Yolo members. And that's really, really important to me. There's not a world in which if Sacramento County had a tolling that they were working on that I would say, well, you know, you got to get through West Sac in order to go to the Bay Area. Most of your people are coming to the Bay Area from, right? There's not a world in which I would say that. And so hopefully the vote that they have represented by SACOG would be enough. And again, for me, as we think about the future, I think we have done a really great job of allowing for, as counties phase in, that they would phase in to this. And so as you have some skin in the game, right, then you have an ability to come to the table. But outside of that, I don't see a world in which it would make sense for other counties to be weighing in on something that directly impacts our residents and our constituents at this moment in time, particularly as we know we're going to need to move quickly.
Thank you, Donna. Anybody else want to weigh in? Sure, yeah, thank you. I too am on the transportation committee for SACOG and a board member since we have a quorum time. Advised we do not have a quorum.
Yes, we've been advised.
So we've been up and down these conversations a lot over the past few weeks. Just from a timing standpoint, I know this item is informational tonight, and we're obviously not going to take an action on it, but we don't meet again until after the SACOG meeting on the 18th. So are you looking for kind of us coalescing around something with Caltrans, not a number? Because I think it would be important and powerful for this board to have some sort of I guess it would be informal, obviously, because it's informational, but something to be able to report back in that conversation on the 18th.
You know, I would say that I want to be transparent about the fact that it took SACOG and YoloTD staff so long to work out our own stuff around Yolo County's, you know, majority representation that we weren't very good partners to Caltrans in giving them an opportunity to weigh in on this draft before it was released to the public. And again, due to time pressure, but also frankly, due to the time that we just needed a lot of back and forth between SACOG and YoloTD. So I don't actually feel like it's fair to ask you to weigh in when we just really have not had the chance to sit down and have that conversation at the staff level. So I guess I would say give us the grace to be good partners by not kind of forcing our hand in one particular direction or another.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you for clarifying that, and I look forward to hearing our colleague down at the end from Caltrans give his speech again here in a second, when he talked a lot this morning around where Caltrans was in this. But just a couple comments. One, thank you, Autumn, and your team and your staff here for your work with SACOG in getting this joint proposal here before us. As I said earlier today, do support having this regional approach to it. I don't think that SACOG should be the tolling authority, and I don't think that Caltrans should be the sole tolling authority. So that leads us to a JPA. In my opinion, there's a lot of benefits to having a JPA, to SACOG, to us, and to Caltrans, quite frankly. So I am supportive of moving forward with the JPA. I think that the structure that is here now is conducive to what we need in getting this up and going. If this progresses the way that we need that JPA, I think having the majority on that board in the beginning is smart. And I think the solution that you guys came up with to add that and make it fluid as we see the region continue to grow, and that JPA set up to allow and accommodate that growth in future tolling needs if that's the case. So thank you for your work on that and for bringing that forward to us here today. Regards to Caltrans, I think we heard a lot in our SACOG meeting this morning, and there was varying views on it. I know there was a meeting after that talked about the same thing. But I do think that there's a benefit in having a representative from Caltrans on that board. They, no matter what that process is, they are going to be outnumbered. They're never gonna have the majority, whether they have one or two. I would favor one seat, and that's what I said earlier today. But we're not giving them the ability to go in and just make wholesale changes. But what we are doing is creating a partnership and collaboration with Caltrans as we progress through this project. I think that is important. We heard that a lot today in our SACOG meeting from folks who were representing counties or cities who aren't on a list to have any sort of tolling up in Placerville or El Dorado County, right? Where they're not seeing the possibility of having tolling come that way, but understand the regional nature of the body of SACOG, what SACOG does, and the importance of not separating and saying, well, you guys sit over there, we're gonna sit over here, we're gonna move forward. They are the owners and operators of the road that we are talking about. And I think it's important for them to have a seat at the table, and I do think that one seat on that would be appropriate. So with that, I'll yield to my other colleagues who haven't had a chance to speak on this. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Almost everything's been said, yet not everyone said it, so I'll jump in. I really appreciate the discussion thus far. I do appreciate the discussion thus far. I think a couple quick comments, just going to the actual draft bylaws, or I guess it's, basically the draft bylaws, in page 10 of those. There is a discussion in there, and so I'm assuming it's just, it hasn't been updated recently, but it talks about Caltrans appointing one director shall be employed Caltrans. And then, of course, the sort of, it's ambiguous around either non-voting or voting director. I've, fortunate to serve on a couple of boards over the years that have had ex officio directors from Caltrans, including this board as well as SACOG. I think that having a voting member from Caltrans would be fine. I think that it does help, maybe I think, to create a level of buy-in. Frankly, that might not honestly exist in the ex officio only board member position. I do, so count me in the category of thinking it's fine to have Caltrans be part of the governing body as a voting member. And then as it relates to the sort of, there's also stipulations in there regarding non-voting directors, and sort of talks about how some of the other agencies, including El Dorado Transportation Commission, as well as PCTPA and Sac County, I don't know. There are plans to have more regional sort of express lane facilities built in the years to come. I honestly think it is important to try and get those folks on board in the non-voting way. I mean, get them engaged, right? I mean, sooner rather than later. I mean, it's as opposed to like waiting, sort of for 5 years, 10 years, whatever that may be. I think because there's already, my understanding, not serving on the SACOG board, is that there's a lot of unfamiliarity with this sort of tool, a lack of familiarity, and so I think having some of the transportation planning agencies be a part of this from sort of the ground floor, especially again in a non-voting capacity, at least initially, but with that anticipation that they are going to sort of take on this tool at some point in the future, actually seems to make sense to have them be a part of the discussions, and so they recognize what is really happening. I think it helps to clear out some of the mystery associated with it. And so just a couple comments there. And then I know you will have us sort of a potential action in January for both boards. There for this board and for SACOG, certainly I know that the SACOG board's got a meeting scheduled on this, but who's to go first? I mean, is there any does that matter in timing and such? And just curious about that.
Yeah, good question. And also thank you for the comment on the non-voting seats. I actually do think that's extremely important, in part because as the first tolling agency, first tolling process, we're going to be entering long-term contracts around things like who's going to do our customer service, who's going to do our back office. These are all long-term contracts that others who want to join will be locked into. And so having the opportunity for them to weigh in on those will, I think, help it make it easier so that when the time comes for them to join, they feel confident in the decisions that we have made. So I just wanted to appreciate your comment there and wanted to build on that. Oh my gosh, it's been such a long day.
Just the sequencing.
Thank you.
Who goes first?
Yeah. Thank you. So yes, in January, the SACOG board will go first. Their meeting is on January 18th, and then our meeting is on the 3rd, I believe. And they also they decided today that they were also gonna try to convene a meeting of their transportation committee in January 4th, which was not previously on the schedule. And similarly, I think we will try to have a meeting of our ad hoc committee, which is currently scheduled for January 1st. We're not gonna do it that day. But I do think we will also want to have that committee have an opportunity to meet as well prior to this coming to either the state hub or our board.
Thanks so much for that. The other, one last quick comment, which is just, it goes back to the issue and the discussion we had earlier regarding the equity plan.
Yep.
I think it also lends itself, the item I raised around just non-voting directors, like, you know, if folks are engaged from the get-go in the non-voting capacity with of course, the intent over time that there is gonna be an expansion in the region, I think it makes it also somewhat easier for, sort of, again, just to make sure people are, really up to speed of what is occurring around that. Because what I could see unfortunately happening is, you know, initial partners are at the table and helping to develop an equity plan. And then, you know, 2 or 3 new members come in some number of years down the road and say, well, we didn't have anything to do with this. We don't sort of, I mean, it could manifest itself in a variety of ways, certainly including the equity plan, but also in a variety of other ways. And I just think, you know, you run the risk of, newer, also bigger partners, thinking that there's a need for, you know, sort of upending the apple cart after something's been in operation for a number of years and working successfully.
Go ahead, Dr.
Just the only thing again, because we heard earlier, I know that you all have actually been very actively chatting with, consulting with PC, I hope I'm gonna get all these acronyms right, PCTPA.
Yeah.
So I think I think it's great just to respond to Director Franks on that as well, because you have been actively consulting with these folks.
Yeah, we hold together what we've been calling our regional toll policy working group. I think the first meeting was in May, possibly April, and has been meeting monthly. We did pause for a few months when there was a lot of uncertainty around the EIR and what was happening. But yeah, I would say that group has probably met 7 times over the last 9 or 10 months. And they have been, and they also did receive drafts of this at the staff level before it was publicly released and had the opportunity to weigh in.
Well, I think we've had an outstanding discussion. We are still gonna give Greg a chance here in a minute. I just want to say, you realize how variable our views are. There's a lot in common here, and I do feel the common ground will be found, and I do think Autumn has made a reasonable request of us that we take no specific action, but let staff continue to work with the other parties and finding something that works. Time is of the essence, and so I just want to know, I'm flexible, actually. I think it'd be nice if you accept a vote and have one person cast it. And that would be a sweet spot for me. Go ahead, Greg.
Go ahead.
You had enough time.
So, first off.
Good.
First off, I do appreciate the YTD team for taking this on and Kirk as well. We got our hands full with the project. But the option of Caltrans being the lead may have crossed our minds, but you know, this is it's a regional process, and I think we're all great agencies and we can all work together to get this done. We would be the delivery arm of the JPA. And I am speaking for all of Caltrans here. So I do have that authority. I will say in District 3 last year and the year before, for a total of about $1 billion, we delivered about 40 projects. So we can do that, and I think we all know we can do that. We're also the traffic operations arm of the GFPA. It just made sense to us as we were working with the team that a 2 + 2 + 2, which has now turned into 2 + 2 plus every once in a while be 3 here, the math. Director Chapman, you know, chatted a little bit at the board meeting. Yes, we will always be a little bit behind, but it made sense to us as an organization that we'd have 2 votes. I appreciate the continued conversations. I do enjoy the perspectives of everybody. Thanking those who gave us a vote. Instead of ex officio, what I told the SACOG board this morning was, you know, this is brand new. It doesn't have to be what we've always done, you guys in ex officio. It will be somewhat at the highest level in the department. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, this is new territory for all of us, and it'll be successful.
I really appreciate that. Again, though, we all disagree with each other. If Dinesh and you were the two guys, would Dinesh disagree with you ever? What I'm saying is, if you had an underling with you as a second person, would that person feel free to disagree with you? Well, we feel free to disagree with each other.
It would be too higher level, or it would be the highest level. It wouldn't necessarily be from District 3, it could be from headquarters.
I mean, but Greg, really, like, would you actually, would you guys disagree with each other, coming both from Caltrans?
You'd have one voice.
Okay, yeah.
Why don't we send one person and ask for 2 votes for that one person? That's essentially it.
Yeah, 2 votes actually really is 2 same votes. I mean, like 2 seats is really 1 vote.
This is fun.
It's an echo.
It's an echo.
All right, I'll wait for them, Greg.
No, that's good, it's good, it's fun.
Okay, Greg, you finished there.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to come.
We're glad to have you, and we're always glad to have Caltrans Rep. SACOG too. We always listen to what is shared. Thank you. Now, it's time for public comment on this issue. Does any member of the public want to speak tonight? Come on up, Alan. Get another 3 minutes.
Thank you.
We need to.
I'll keep it in
Keep
within the lines here, right? There's the solid yellow double line. First, I wonder how much money this committee will actually have to spend on equity. How much being done, because a lot of the money is already committed to mitigation, it's not clear. I saw some early money, 6 to 8 million, not 10 million, so what is anticipated. Maybe we'll hit the jackpot like in Washington DC, where we got $40 tolls for the managed lanes, which is what, yeah, the $40 tolls, look it up, Washington DC, managed lanes, $40 tolls sometimes, yes. Some are 60 at the worst. Enforcement, I think enforcement's really critical, especially if it's HOV3. There's no automated way of enforcing 3+. There's an honor system. I think you should have a chip member, at least ex officio on your board, because enforcement's really critical. We know what the HOV lanes are, there's been no enforcement. We had 50% scofflaws on the HOV lanes. I think we should make enforcement part of it. If you're really serious about 3+, please consider putting a CHP person on the board for enforcement, so you don't forget that. I'm of the first belief that no taxation without representation. And I think only elected people should vote on tolls and taxes and things like that. So I have a problem with a bureaucrat with tenure to be on the board. So I would suggest an ex officio member. Caltrans is more appropriate than a voting member. You're going to set tolls and things like that. I think that's more appropriate than our democracy. I think Caltrans has plenty of power and an ex officio member. And also with the observation that I know Caltrans is on this board, but many meetings, we've talked about I-80 and Caltrans has said nothing. So I don't know, sometimes it's not transparent to me as a member of the public sitting in these meetings what Caltrans has. They don't talk very much in a lot of the meetings. No offense, but you guys have not been very communicative what's going on. And finally, this is from Richardson, Gerson, and Watson Gerson, which is the handbook that the Davis City Council has about how to execute the Brown Act. And this is what it says about ad hoc committees, like the ad hoc toll committee. It says basically, an ad hoc committee provides committees can be required, provided these committees do not have a continuing subject matter jurisdiction. That doesn't say 12 months, it's a continuing matter of jurisdiction. And the toll policy is clearly a continuing matter. Continuing, you have a grant for toll policy that could continue on. You can form a joint powers board that's continuing, it gets a continuing matter. Your ad hoc committee is not legal, it cannot meet secretly, it's not an ad hoc committee, it is a standing committee. And I suggest your January meeting needs to be publicly noticed under the Brown Act and made public. I would like that commitment tonight. Otherwise, I will make an issue of it publicly because I think it's not appropriate that members of this board should be involved with a secret meeting on such an important matter that it can involve millions of dollars. And also suggest to be really democratic. Maybe you should have representatives from Solano County on the board too, because they're probably going to pay a lot of the tolls because 90% of the people on that causeway are not from Davis, but they're from outside from Sacramento County and Solano County. Maybe that's hard, but you always like to tax people from tax foreigners living overseas. Taxing someone in Solano County with toll is very good. So maybe you want to consider that, but please put a CHP member on and please stop meeting in secret. Thank you very much.
Alan, I do believe that this ad hoc committee is only in existence until the establishment of the JPA, then it
You
expires.
cannot form it's a continuing subject matter as a test. Continuing subject matter is a continuing subject matter.
The subject matter is to create the JPA and then it dissolves. Everybody, do you wish to weigh in on that?
We can, we'll certainly take a look, but it is my understanding that it's the short lived that committee was formed for the brief requirement related to the establishment of the JPA, and so it's not a long-term issue, and so that it's inappropriate for an ad hoc, but I will certainly take a look at it.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak on this issue? All right, our robust discussion is concluding. Thank you, everybody, for what you put on, you shared with us tonight. So, item 8, and I know you're all probably losing enthusiasm for continuing the meeting, but item 8 is on the agenda at my request, because I received a notice from the CPA that I had that kind of indicate satisfaction with actions taken by our district to ensure that we are operating at appropriate financial standards. So why don't you give us a very quick summary of what kind of financial controls are in place to protect our district from any kind of adverse use of our or inappropriate use of our finance.
So, good evening. I'm Chas Rodrigo, the Director of Finance and Administration. So I want to thank you for allowing us to address the auditor's request about the fiscal year 22-23 annual financial report, which is currently in progress. I do have a brief presentation for you. I timed it to about 8.5 minutes, so if you guys can hang on until then, we can go through that, unless you just want a brief overview.
Go ahead and share your slides. We appreciate brevity though.
All right.
Because we're not brief.
So I'll cover a few key aspects of YoloTD's internal control environment, focusing on our objectives, recently updated policies, and then compliance initiatives. I'll also provide an update on specific actions that we took to address the audit finding for the internal control assessment for the fiscal year 21-22. So last year's report. Next slide, please. So our internal control objectives serve as our operations guiding principles. And at the core, we understand our responsibility in allocating resources for transportation and multimodal needs across all of the communities that we serve. We recognize the significance of prudence, oversight, and the risk reduction in managing diverse funding sources and providing services to the public. So safeguarding our environment against fraud and errors requires a proactive approach, which is achieved through strategic design of our control environment, implementation, and ongoing training of staff. And given the multitude of funding sources, navigating through federal, state, and local regulations and internal policies, this remains a constant focus for our staff. So ongoing reviews of our policies, our guidelines, and training aim to meet compliance standards, ensuring that we are operating within the framework that governs us. And then our controls include how we defend against risk, not just financially, but also for our physical assets and the data that is managed through our IT systems. And then we also recognize that as a public agency, transparency is non-negotiable. So simplifying complexities, providing clear reports, and facilitating thorough audits are not just objectives, they are principles that guide and dictate our interactions with the public and our partnering agencies. And then lastly, maintaining public trust. So having a thorough, transparent management and protection of public resources is an important factor for us. And as you are aware, YoloTD stays actively engaged in communicating with our communities and providing timely, relevant, and understandable, hopefully, information to our boards, our advisory committees, and within our ad hoc committees. So these core objectives really serve as backbone to our control framework. They are effective if we have leadership commitment, clear policies, effective training, regular monitoring, and an overall awareness of the impacts of non-compliance. Next slide, Heather. So ongoing compliance checks over the past 2 years, as you know, the district has experienced a significant staff turnover, mainly in the management roles. As of December 2021, Leah Levinson took on the role as interim CFO, leading a comprehensive review of policies and updates as well. And as part of that proactive strategy, several operational and procedural changes were initiated, including the implementation of a new financial system and payroll application. So this goal was to align current regulations and also leverage advanced technology to enhance our controls, generate timelier reports, and improve our overall efficiency. So despite the challenges posed by many of the staff transitions, the finance team worked diligently to implement these changes, in addition to undergoing significant training within areas of our department. So just for a little insight, before I applied for this position, I dove into many of these board agenda items and minutes, as well as the financial information that was available on the website. I was encouraged.
Are you glad you took the job?
I took it. So, you know, that encouraged me that policies were being reviewed and that they were being updated and in concert with implementation of a new financial system and payroll system. So those two things need to go in line. What it also indicated to me was that YoloTD places a high priority on maintaining a strong control environment. That's also very important as a finance officer, a government finance officer. So what it also signaled to me is that the new systems would be designed in a way that would address any of the updates that were made to our policies and practices. So here, this list that you've been looking at for the last 2 minutes are the amended policies that were brought to the board, with the significant relevance being in the financial internal controls. And although finance spearheaded the changes of these policies, it is the responsibility of all district staff to review it, to understand it, to promote it, and to comply with them. So in 3 months that I've been here, I have consulted these policies in addition to quite a few others to address any questions that have come up or anything that we've been unsure about. Next slide, please. So this brings us to the independent auditor's internal control assessment. This is something that is issued annually after we complete our annual audit. So the auditors play a pivotal role in ensuring financial accountability and transparency of our public agencies. So YoloTD is subject to an annual financial audit covering Transportation Development Act, local transportation funds, state transportation funds, and federal single audits. So this involves a comprehensive examination of our financial transactions, validation of legal compliance, testing our safeguards, and addressing any potential fraud or misstatements. And so the findings that come from this report are really recommendations in how we can continuously improve in governance and our overall operational practice. So for the fiscal year 21-22, this is a report that the board has previously seen earlier this year when Mr. Levinson presented the financial statements. We had one audit finding as a result, with the discrepancy being in grant expense allocation. What occurred was that there was different denominators that were used in calculating fair revenue, which went undetected by the controls that we had in place at the time, leading to an overclaim of $12,268, which impacted our reimbursement calculation. So in response to that one audit finding, we implemented additional staff training, which continues to happen currently. We've clarified on procedures, and we redesigned some of our calculation worksheets to ensure accuracy. We also have more communication with our grant agencies to address any of the concerns that we have, in addition to seeking guidance about eligible federal expenses before submitting claims. So basically, the auditor's assessment, as I mentioned, is issued each year. And it basically reinforces the reliability of our financial information and underscores our commitment to not just detecting fraud, but not fraud, but risk and fraud, and avoiding it as well. So for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023, as I mentioned, that audit is currently underway. We are expecting the next auditor's assessment to be issued sometime in January, and we'll return to the board with all of the reports. So key takeaways here, we are reviewing policies. We have submitted updates, various updates to the board for review. We're continuing our monitoring and enforcement. We have implemented improvements for the audit finding that was from the 21-22 annual audit. Currently, the 22-23 is in progress, which is expected to be brought back to the board in sometime January or February. And then as a request of the board, we will now move forward in reporting the status of our internal controls on a semi-annual basis, unless you specify otherwise.
Well, thank you very much, and let me state on behalf of
Is that
my colleagues and myself, how grateful we are to have you as part of our team.
Thank you.
It's not easy to hire people to do what you do. You're in high demand among many agencies, so thank you for choosing YoloTD. And, you know, we could have put this on consent, we talked about it, but I wanted it on the record that, we have a fiduciary obligation as board members, and I wanted it on the record that we're paying attention. And I think stay with semi-annual, if we feel the need for less frequent or more frequent, we can talk later. But it's better to be in good shape than bad shape, because once you're in bad shape, you're usually in really bad shape. And we don't want to be there.
I agree. And we bring these annual statements to you annually. So it's good to ask midway.
Sure, I do have just, it's a quick question on this.
Please, Dr. Early.
I'm just curious, the auditors that we use, how often do you switch out?
That's a very good question. That actually was one of the questions that I wondered when I was researching, because we have had Richardson for quite a long time.
What's quite a long time?
As far as I can go back.
Yeah, so it was a very interesting mystery that we unraveled, and I'm so grateful that Chaz asked the question, because we have a very unusual arrangement in that the contract with Richardson has been controlled by SACOG. Dating back for so many years that we don't have any record of when we agreed to them.
Oh, is it like an evergreen contract?
Absolutely.
So we have had some conversations with SACOG staff and let them know that we will be separating that and having our own, going out to bid for our own independent auditors next year.
Okay, so we've been with this one for a little over, as far as going back, so maybe 20 years. And then moving forward, so after this audit that we get in January, we will take it to bid.
That is what we are discussing about. When we talked with SACOG, the agreement for them to conduct the annual audit was really more focused on the TDO. And so this came in concert with also doing the annual financial audit work for the district. So these are two different engagements. And so we are in discussion about doing an RFP for audit for that services.
The last thing I would just say on this is just best practices, financial best practices, which hopefully we all know, but just in case we don't, right, would be 3 to 5 years, right?
Yeah.
5 being a max
Yes.
of when you would switch out, and you can get into a lot of trouble, right? Just sticking with the same. And so whether SACOG says like, no, we should be doing it, hopefully they're switching out who audits them. But you don't even have to comment on that, but if they're not,
You should request it as a board member.
there you go.
It is best practice to do at least an RFP every 5 years. Doesn't mean that they won't, become our auditors again. But yeah, that was one of the questions that I asked before applying.
Additional comments or questions? Members of the public? Alan, do you trust us?
Yes.
Thank you.
I know a little bit about this because I'm a CPA, was for a while. This is really important. Thank you very much. I've watched this board for a while and I noticed the early retirement of the last executive director, and I wondered why that happened, and I wondered it was financially related. And I wondered if there were financial controls. So I'm now reassured this is not gonna be the problem, and I'm sure that's fine. So that brings me confident. When something happens, you guys are gonna recover. I don't know, this was probably uncomfortable. The second thing, I'm gonna tell you a story. I want the control should also not just monitor the money, but also monitor the operational numbers and make sure they're not being funded. My first job out of business school was with a newspaper. And I was in the circulation department. I noticed there was this big room with tons and tons of newsprint. And it turns out the circulation department was hiding their circulation drops by overprinting the newspapers, stuffing the single copy mailboxes and taking them back to the store. And they only reported to the publisher how many they printed, not how many were actually sold. Because there were no audit controls about what was happening on the returns. So I hope that the controls, which are really important, also monitor and control the operation, the ridership numbers, the accuracy of those. There was a transit agency in San Mateo County where the marketing director stole $200,000 worth of cash receipts. It was pretty egregious, so because you didn't report people. So the operational numbers are really important, and I'm glad this is appropriate. And Tom, thank you very much. This is really important. Thank you for bringing this up. It's very important to put on the agenda.
Thank you, Alan. All right, thank you. I think we're done, are we? On this issue.
Oh, yeah. This issue.
Not the issue. Yeah, we're getting close, so we're down. And thank you, and we'll look forward to continuing to stay abreast. And I'm one of those people where I don't always get everything the first time I hear it. I need to hear repetition. So regular review isn't a bad idea, given the weight of our responsibility. All right, so in item 9 is administrative reports, board member verbal reports. On my right, anybody? Nothing. Okay. You're good. Okay. On my left. Caltrans, want to say anything? All right. You were asked. All right. So no board member reports. Transdev, is someone going to report for them tonight?
I don't believe so, no.
So the news is all good as far as we know. Okay, maybe not.
I don't have anything to report.
All right,
I
nothing
couldn't say, sorry.
All right. So that brings us to our executive director's verbal report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, how lucky are we to have our wonderful new director of finance? We are so thrilled to have her on board. This is the first time she's presented to you.
She said yes.
And no kidding. So glad she said yes. So we're thrilled to have her. As you can see, and I don't know if you noticed, one of the things in the consent calendar is also the first quarter financial report. And I can say it is an amazing improvement over the way we previously reported for the first quarter. Take a look if you haven't already. Alan, take a look. So anyway, moving on. One of the other things that was on your consent calendar was the chair rotation. And so at our next.
Now you jumped. I was gonna talk about that.
Well, I couldn't miss an opportunity to thank our current chair, Tom Slaughter. This is his last meeting, and I can say to chair.
Relief is
As
felt.
chair, as chair, and my second year in this role, and just want to appreciate Tom for his leadership this year. It's been a year, I would say, where for as many things as we were driving forward ourselves, we were also responding to things that were coming our way, and a lot of unexpected hits. And I just really appreciated his flexibility in dealing with all of the crazy things that came out of left field at us this year. Very much looking forward to welcoming our new chair, Director Chapman from Davis, and our new vice chair, Director Early. What? Who decided that? Our new team, we'll have a fresh team of our new board members will be in the leadership role. We look forward to seeing what they do with it. A couple other things, those of you that are on the SACOG board know, today the SACOG board approved an SB 125. This is the new transit funding request of $500,000 to YoloTD to update our short range transit plan. That's something we're very excited about. It's part of that allocation. This is the bailout money that the governor passed as part of the budget this year for transit. We hope there'll be more money to come, but we were included in the initial allocation for $500,000. We're very happy about that. And then lastly, I have other things, but it's been a long meeting. So I will just say, this weekend, staff participated in the Woodland Holiday Parade with our Beeline vehicle. I've got a sinus infection I've been recovering from, so I was not out there, but I heard great things. I saw photos, and I just really want to thank the team. It has been a crazy month for the YoloTD staff. Everybody's working extremely hard, and yet to see the enthusiasm, you know, of getting out there at the parade. We have a remarkable team, and I just really want to acknowledge them for that. And I'm glad some of you were there and saw that. So that concludes my report. If there's no questions on that, I will go to the long range calendar.
Go to the long range calendar.
All right.
No ad hoc committee reports, I presume,
No.
such as they are.
Such as they are, right. So in January, you will have, of course, Yolo 80 managed lane update and possible action, probably multiple actions. As you heard about, we'll of course have action on the JPA agreement, as well as some of the MOUs that we will have for implementing some of the VMT mitigation strategies. So keep an eye out for that. We hope to provide an update on some of our transit planning activities, including the SRTP that we just got funding from SACOG for. Report and possible action on the Woodland Transit Center relocation. And potentially our audited financial, as you heard from Chad, that may be in February. We'll see how quickly the auditors get it to us. And then in February, we may have yet another action on the managed lanes. This is just going to be a recurring thing. We'll see what that might be. And then we'll be coming back to you around our updates to ADA policy rider information. That was something we had as an informational item several months ago, and we think that'll be ready for your action in February. And then it's time to start thinking about our budget and work plan for the next fiscal year. So we will be giving you an overview of what that process looks like. We'll see if we get to all of this, but I definitely want to make sure we get our 3-month status report on the Beeline and the Woodlands, which started in late October. So checking in on the progress and how that's going, and also potential expansion of that service into the town of Yolo. So lots of items to come, lots of exciting things to come.
My turn. Okay, I'm gonna take us out here, and I'm just gonna say, did you want to comment?
Yes, I have a question.
Ask your question.
From what I understand, the last fight this board has on the I-80 project is the FHAW term sheet. When will that be on the agenda so this board has a chance to make a final bite of that apple?
Good question.
Yeah, Brian's presentation earlier listed that as February. I'm not sure that we'll get to it in February. I think that is a TBD, but then it will be sometime in the next few months, and that will be the final bite of the apple. But we want to make sure that happens after the preferred project is selected and the EIR is certified. Those are steps that need to happen before we can submit that term sheet.
Thank you. All right, this basically for, Director Warren and Director Lucas and myself were here 2 years ago, and you could have seen how we functioned 2 years ago compared to what happened here tonight. It's really like night and day. And I can only just say, Autumn, you really have delivered for us in so many amazing ways. We're so grateful to have you. And the maturity and your background and your experience has just revolutionized our operation here. And that not only are we a transportation district, but you've taken on this project responsibility, which is immense. And it's not going to let up for a while. So I just want to say thank you for doing that, and to all the staff. But Brian, we appreciate you tonight. We appreciate all your colleagues. Obviously, we've already said what we think about you, Beth, and I'm so happy to have you. So much for the staff. They're just tremendous. But I also want to congratulate Josh and Dante. They're going to take us even higher and better places in the year to come, I have no doubt.
No pressure.
And beyond that, I just wish everybody a happy holiday season. It is Christmas, Hanukkah, all those good things. So let's all make sure we take time to enjoy our loved ones and friendships and all the rest. And so on January 22nd of 2024, we had the wrong, we said 2023, but 2024. It'll be a Josh and Dante show. So with that, friends, any last word from anybody else? Oh, adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.